Johar friends, I'm Shashi and welcome to the fourth episode of my podcast e-logue. Finally, we are here with a much awaited episode with Sentisungla Longchar, who's a clinical psychologist and is also currently working as an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology, Lady Shri Ram College for Women, University of Delhi. Today, she'll be talking about anxiety and stress, whether there's any difference between the two, and how one can cope with them. Also, towards the end, she'll be answering a common question which was asked by many students. So stay with us to know her answer. Let's welcome our guest. Hello, Sentisungla Longchar. Welcome to my podcast, and I'm so glad that you're finally here despite your hectic schedule.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.
Uh, and in this episode, like as I had spoken to you earlier, we'll be talking about stress and
Hmm.
anxiety related to exams. And
Hmm.
as you know, these days, students and kids are undergoing a whole lot of pressure to perform, and all kinds of pressure they are facing, peer pressure, parental pressure, and also they have to bear the burden of their own expectations,
Hmm.
which is having a very detrimental impact on their physical and mental health.
Hmm.
So to begin with, can you please tell us what anxiety is?
Hmm. See, yes, I think we use the word anxiety in our everyday lingua without actually understanding what anxiety is, right? So, actually, in clinical terms, anxiety is basically a response to something uh, which is unknown. Okay, so which is unknown, and which is internal, which is vague or conflictual in nature. So that is precisely the definition of what anxiety is about. So so a person would be like, oh, I don't know what's happening to me, but I'm feeling that, but I would not be able to pinpoint where it comes from. Okay, so it's like the trigger is quite unknown. As you develop anxiety, and it is also internal, so you have this sense of restlessness, and it's vague. I don't know where to pinpoint my anxiety, right? And also anxiety, like when you're talking about conflictual, it also starts because of all this repressed thoughts, that has developed over the years, right? So a repressed thoughts or repressed thought or wishes or wish that you have repressed over a prolonged period of time. So that's how Freud also talks about repression. So that's basically what anxiety is about. So I think something to learn out here is that anxiety is we use it in our everyday lingua in a very layman-manish way, but anxiety definitely has definition, and anxiety gets provoked or anxiety gets developed because of all these reasons. Okay, and when a person has anxiety, okay, and if it's a clinical anxiety, that means when a person is not able, when anxiety affects personal, professional, and social setup, that will be a full blown, like anxiety diagnosis a person might fall under. So that's in a very short way what anxiety is about. Yeah.
Okay.
When we are too stressed or over anxious, we tend to panic or feel scared. So, is there any relation between anxiety and fear?
Okay. Yes. So anxiety and fear. Yes. So again, we use anxiety and fear very interchangeably again, but definitely there is a huge difference between anxiety and fear. So usually, uh, fear is also a concept that we use to juxtapose with anxiety. Okay. So fear is basically a response to a known, external, definite, or non conflictual threat. So we experience fear in our everyday life, like it can be a very normal thing, like you're scared of like cockroach, a very simple example, right? So you're scared of cockroach and you see a cockroach, and mostly for women it's like we make a noise, we shout, it's like, yeah, we kind of like respond to it. So a cockroach is out there, or maybe a dog, you're scared of dog, I mean, or maybe a dog which does not look very well, like who's sick, right? With skin chapping off and all. So, or maybe that you're just scared of dog itself. So, or anything, any object. Okay. So, fear is basically a response to something that is outside, okay, and which is tangible, which is definite, and which is non-conflictual in nature. So that is what fear is about, okay. So we experience that in our everyday life. So again, the difference between fear and anxiety is that, yeah.
Okay. We also use other terms like, stress, tension, and worry. So,
Hmm.
is there any, difference between these terms?
Okay, so yeah, we use this word very interchangeably, as like in a very laymanish manner. So anxiety that I've explained to you, and also fear that I've explained to you right now, and stress. So yeah, I mean, in stress also there's some concepts that we need to understand. Maybe it's definition, or like what stress is about, right? Now, um, if you look at anxiety, stress, and fear, okay, these are all emotional responses, right? So emotional responses that a person has experienced or have gone through, right? So stress, likewise, even in fear, is response to an external trigger. Okay, so even stress, when we're talking about stress, okay, it's also a response which is typically caused by an external trigger that is outside. Okay, so stress can be short term. It can be like stress in relation to, like a work deadline, or it can be, like a fight with a loved one. Okay, or maybe unable to do a certain work, or it can be discrimination, or maybe because of any illness that we would, have a certain sense of stress. So stress is also provoked by what is outside, okay. um, and sometimes, if stress mounts on for a longer period of time, then obviously that it will lead to conflictual responses, and it will lead also to a lot of biological responses. So if I would now differentiate between anxiety, fear, and stress, anxiety is, like conflictual in nature. Stress and fear, they are like, in the same spectrum, but um, fear is non-conflictual, and stress sometimes can be conflictual in nature. Like, you have a fight with your husband or wife for a prolonged period of time, or you are very, irritable in relation to doing a course that you do not want to do, right, and you do not want to study. So you have not been performing well, and then you have failed, right? So then what happens is that stress over a very long period of time can also give you conflict, right? So fear basically is here and now. Stress, it's here and now, and it can also lead to a longitudinal, like a course of action of that specific problem. Yes. So that's, I should say, in a very simple way, the difference between anxiety, fear, and stress. Yeah.
Okay. So, what are the ways that we can, stop, like, the building up of this stress and anxiety? Like, how can one
Hmm.
deal with it?
So, see, when I'm talking about stress, so I'll explain that in two ways. Okay. Now, there's also a huge a spectrum of disorder under ICD-10, International Classification of Diseases. I'll go by that, and what are the targeted treatments that we give. So there can also be anxiety and stress, which can be our everyday, and how do we deal with it. So this are like there are two ways of how to look at it. So, like, uh, first one is, clinical syndromes or symptoms or disorders or diagnosis, and another can be stress or anxiety, which does impact us, but through some coping mechanisms, easy coping mechanisms, that we can deal with our anxiety and stress that comes our way. Now, the most important thing is that, like, in ICD-10, that is what you call as International Classification of Diseases 10. Okay, so that is what we use in India for diagnostic criteria for any psychological disorders. Okay, so
Mhm.
it comes under alphanumeric. We call it alphanumeric F10 and F48. So there's a huge range of, like disorders that come under the heading of neurotic, stress-related, and somatoform disorders. Okay, so under this alphanumeric, F is alpha and 10 is numeric. So ICD is based on a diagnostic criteria of alphanumeric F10 to F48 for this specific disorder, anxiety and neurotic disorders. So, So you have under that, like, phobic anxiety disorders. You have under phobic anxiety disorders, you have agoraphobia, social phobia, and quite a few of them. I'm not going to detail of all of it right now. And you also have F41, which you have other anxiety disorders like panic disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, mixed anxiety and depressive disorders. Again, quite a few of it. Then F42, you have obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay, and it can be predominantly obsessive or predominantly compulsive, or it can be mixed obsessional thoughts and acts. So under this F40 to F48, okay, you have quite a lot of disorders that exist, okay, according to the diagnostic criteria. So if it falls under diagnostic criteria, and when do we say it's a diagnostic criteria? When it hampers us in our personal, professional, and occupational or social network. So you'll not be able to do any of that well before, as compared to what you have been doing before. Okay, so if you have performed well before and you have not been able to perform because of all this phobia, anxiety, obsessions, and all these disorders that you have, that comes under the diagnostic criteria. So under the diagnostic criteria, you have like for a phobic disorder, a targeted treatment like systematic desensitization. Okay, and also, like, for obsessive compulsive disorder, we also have uh, exposure response prevention, ERP, right? And for all of these disorders, that we also have a very larger gamut of psychotherapy, what you call as cognitive behavior therapy, right? So according to that, you have very targeted clinical treatment, okay, with medication or without medication. And now the other part about anxiety and stress, if I have to look into anxiety and stress, yeah, which does hamper in our everyday life, but which is not very severe to hamper in any part of our lives, but which is somehow distressful to a certain extent. And then, how do we deal with it as a student, or as like as individuals who are like engaged in different fields, or as just as an individual, right? So the most important thing is that if you have anxiety or stress, talk to somebody. Okay, it can be like talking out, talk to your husband, talk to your wife, talk to your friend, talk to your mother, or talk to anybody that you can confide in. Okay, do not talk to anybody that whom you do not confide, because if you talk to somebody, if you do not confide, again, it will be very difficult. It might boomerang again. So talk to somebody. The first important step is that talk to somebody whom you confide, and at least venting out what has been suppressed or repressed inside for some time. So it's always good to release those stress, right? And also try to eliminate anything that is negative around you. So that if there's something, some situation or variable which targets your anxiety or stress, like maybe a friend who is not really trustworthy, maybe a neighbor who is not very good, or maybe just the environment is a very noisy place that you're sitting to study, and which you cannot concentrate. Try to eliminate the around your environment those situations or variables. So try to eliminate the stresses. And the second point is that you also need to cultivate social support systems. So if you're not, as a student, you're not able to concentrate in your studies because you also have anxiety in trying to get notes and all those things, trying to have a good support system, like 3 4 of you how many ever that you are, you can also create a good social support system as a student, and that is also applicable to all of us. And also, it's also good to meditate. Meditation is very important, right? Like to introspect and to retrospect. Okay, when you meditate, you also try to introspect and retrospect, and also you try to relax and to calm down. Okay, so that is important. And also exercise. Some exercise is important, right? Physical exercise is important, because with exercise comes release of certain like chemicals in our body which makes us feel good, right? And also, like, you can also reframe your thinking process. Okay, so reframing your thinking process is also very important. So if you're a procrastinator, okay, so, and because of procrastination, you have developed a negative self image about yourself. Okay, so what you can do is that you can also stop thinking about being negative about yourself, and think positive, try to think positive. We might think that thinking positive is a cliche, but it is not. But it's actually very true because of all the neurotransmitters that's involved in, like, in a negative thoughts and positive thoughts. So you can also like reframe your thinking. So if you have a negative thought, counter that with positive thoughts, and that will also help in that will also help neurobiologically, and also um, like just to kind of think in a positive manner. And obviously that I've mentioned to you that if you if and the other thing is that even in this, that you need a simple counseling from a professional. So you want to seek help, so you can also go to a counselor, okay, or a therapist that's there. And if you think that you're not able to handle with all the things that's like that I've mentioned, then you can also try to seek help from a counselor, because then it gives you a kind of a structured understanding. It gives you some structure to pursue on with your work also. So these are two different ways of looking into anxiety, stress, and all this like thing that we have talked about. So one is definitely which is psychiatric and psychological disorders, and the other is can be our everyday life, uh, in which you can follow those things that I've just mentioned. And other than that, if you have additional ways of dealing with it idiosyncratically, that's also very good. Yes.
As I'd said earlier, these days students are under undue stress and all kinds of pressure, such as parental, peer, and academic pressure. So, what would you suggest how one should deal with it?
Okay, so there are quite a few things that you have asked me right now over here. Peer pressure and parental pressure, right? So I think and obviously then the student goes into stress or anxiety mode, right? The button is switched on, So it's very interesting how all this operates. Like, uh, I usually ask my students at Lady Shriram College, my psychology department, which has the highest percentage intake in India, to say, and I always tell them that, when they reach third year, okay, I usually ask them when they reach third year, because they have gone through a certain span of years in the college. So I always ask them, do you always feel that you are less as compared to your others? As compared to the others, or as compared to your other classmates, everybody smiles and everybody laughs, and then they say that, yes ma'am, that's very true, so it's very subjective. Okay, so when you're talking about peer pressure and parental pressure, so uh, LSR, all the students that I've asked, in the third year, they are all toppers, like toppers from state universities, and from different states, and from CBSE and all. But they still feel like, oh, I think I'm like not really good as compared to my other friends. So that's the reason that it's very subjective in nature how we look at things. Okay, so I think one very important thing to look at it is like ego strength. Okay, so how confident that you are, like inside of you. So ego strength is made up of all the rational like introspection about the self. So how you think about yourself, which is very rational in its manner of its operation. So I think very important thing is that we have to be very confident of who we are. So we need to start developing our personality. We need to start looking inside of us, develop insights about who we are. What do I want to do in life? What are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? So I think if you go through that process, and it's never too late to do that, so at any phase of life that you can do that. And if you develop such kind of like strengthening your ego, and like looking at trying to have insights about who you are, I think that really helps to guard yourself as who you are. And then no matter what kind of bombardment will come from any directions, be it your friends or be it your parental pressure, I think since you will have clarity of mind after you go through that. You might not be intimidated by all the situations around. Okay, yes, I know it's important. Parents also, they kind of like stress you out or stress us out sometimes to perform, but then you can also just tell your parents that, can you not say too much? Sometimes it's also good to be a bit assertive. Can you just not tell me too much, because it's creating a lot of anxiety in me? So I think it's also good to talk out with your parents, right? Yes, I want to perform the best. I want to do really good in life. I want to really get good scores. But if you pressurize me too much, then probably it is going to be, the opposite way of how things would be responded. So I think it's also, as youngsters, good to talk to your parents like openly, if you can, possibly, because in some homes that you'll not be able to, but in some homes that you can just give some indications, right? And in relation to, again, like, so I think the first important thing as a psychologist or as a clinical psychologist, I believe in that. Even I had gone through that process, that developing ego strength is very important. And like performance anxiety, like some individuals, it's also good to deal with your anxiety. How you also have we also have this concept of eustress, which is a normal anxiety that you have. So having normal anxiety is okay, but if your anxiety is very high, then I think you need to try to control that with whatever that I've mentioned previously, right? And it's also good to have an ambition and a goal, to be away from all this, like peer pressure, all of it, like parental pressure, whatever pressure that you have. It's also good to have an ambition and a goal, because then you would actually not be intimidated by all this pressure if you have certain ambition and goal that you decide from beginning. Okay, yes, I do understand that, many students, you're confused, you don't know what to do, like, you're still in your deciding mode, or you are yet to decide. But it's somehow good to kind of like know like what you want to do in life, because then it'll drive you towards achieving that goal, and it'll come very naturally for you. So that is what, to have a clear set ambition and goal. So I think that will also relate to what you call as passion. So once you're doing something, you'll be very passionate about. So when you're passionate about something in life, you will not be confused, or you will not be stressed about the things that's around you. And another thing for students and for all of us is that, procrastination, not to procrastinate at all, because the more that you procrastinate, the more that the stress level would keep on increasing and would pile up, and then you'd not be able to do your things well, right? And also, to sleep at the right time, because what happens is that many students, or many of us, it's a very natural human phenomena that we want to do everything at the end, like wrap up everything. So you'll not study the whole semester, and after that, okay, I have 1 week's time and let me finish everything during that time. So what happens is that you pressurize yourself so much of not sleeping at night and taking caffeine and like tea and all. So like what happens is that you're not sleeping, but again, you're taking in other stimulants. Okay, so these are stimulants, right? So you take in all of these things, and it also haywires your sleep pattern. Okay, so sleep has got different stages, which is detected by the electrophysiological mechanisms. So all this sleep patterns go haywire. Okay, so those patterns go haywire, and what you do is that next day you have your exam, you have not been sleeping well for past 5 days, and then when you go to write your exam, you blank out. And it happens to a lot many students. Okay, and then you will not remember anything, and it's a reality, mind you. Okay, so you blank out because then you have been taking stimulants. Your sleep pattern has gone haywire because of the electrophysiological mechanisms that's there. So sleeping at the right time is very important, and also that will be determined by doing your work on time. So I think, and also a light exercise. If you have some anxiety, you can pace around the room, sit down, take a deep breath also, right? You can exercise, take a brisk walk, right? And after that, sit down and try to just calm yourself, and also have breathing take breathing exercises, and like And also you can also lie down, and after that cognitively try to relax your muscles. Also you can command your mind to relax your muscles, to let all the muscles be relaxed, right? And take a deep breath and go back to your task of, like doing your work, or maybe studying or any other work that you are engaged in. Yes, so these are like a few things that I've told you, maybe quite a lot. Yes.
No, no, I think, I mean, like, all of them are quite
Mm-hmm.
helpful. Now, the last question that I would like to ask you is, like, a lot many students, they complain, or like
Mm-hmm.
they say, like, that they're having difficulty in memorizing, because there is, so much of information that they need to cram in, so they find
Mm-hmm.
it difficult to, remember everything. So, is there any, way or method that you would like to suggest, or any
Mm-hmm.
kind of, certain changes that they need to bring about, so that they can strengthen their memory power?
Okay. Yes. Very interesting that you asked me. So in psychology, we have like from first year they have to study like or maybe when in 11, 12 also they have to study a chapter on memory. Okay, and then later on, as you go further and further in your studies, memory becomes a very intrinsic part in the field of clinical. Okay, that helps us to really go into our very in-depth diagnosis. So but as a student, if you have to talk about memory, so there are memory aids. Okay, so what you call as mnemonics. Okay, so mnemonics are basically ways to improve your memory. Before that, let me just quickly give you an example. When I was in medical campus, there was this guy, and like he had a small paper, a roll of paper, always on his pocket, right? And after that, like people, the senior batch would say that, oh, he's very intelligent. He's actually a very intelligent doctor. I mean, he can just remember all the things that we have studied in MBBS first year, and in final year, he can still respond to it. He's got such good memory. And then, then I saw that he always used to carry a small sheet of paper in his pocket. Then I thought, when I saw that, he had what you call is like all this mnemonics, okay, all methods of mnemonics that he had in his pocket. And I was like, bingo, that's it. What we have been teaching and what we have been studying, we actually do not put into practice. So mnemonics are basically ways and methods of how to improve your memory. Okay, so there's this what you call as uh, letter system, in which or maybe a word, a letter and word system, in which if you have one, then with one you attach one alphabet or one thing that you want to remember, one variable that you want to remember, like um, say coffee. Okay, and two, it's like, okay, tea. Okay, so these are very simple things. Okay, so you can use alphabets, and you can also use like numbers to remember something. Okay, to remember anything that you want to. And the second part is like where you can also use uh, recalling names and faces together. Like, if you have been made to if you have been introduced to somebody else, okay, in a social environment. Okay, so always try to remember the face and the name together, and the next step is that ask the person to ask to repeat his name, and then the other person will repeat, and you will also repeat that word, right? So you try to remember people's faces and names in that manner. That is more fruit that's a very good way to retain the memory. Another thing is that you can also use the acronym. Okay, the acronym method, in which um, you can like form an acronym of the pointers that you are planning to study. Like what are the reasons that led to the what are the reasons that led to COVID-19, for example? Okay, so then you have like virus, or or that you have like worldwide disruption of economy, so W, or you can have, so anything that you want to put in there. Okay, so in case you have formed some pointers, okay, and that you want to remember, so what you can do is that take the first alphabet of it, right? So you have W, or you can have You can have A or you can have S. Okay, so what you do is that now then after that you can create a meaningful word out of that, so as easy as that, was. Okay, so it can be the other way around, that you find it meaningful for you, that you can remember. So saw, right? So either you can remember it as was or saw. So what happens is that it becomes very easy. A huge pointer that's there is remembered just by few words. Okay, so we hang on our memory onto those alphabets, right? So it becomes a very good way of remembering. I can still remember my, say, 20 years back, the things that I've made my acronym, I can still remember that, right? So I'm taken back to the doctor that I've told you about. So that is how he remembered his things. And even me, that I remember one important things that I've made 20 years back. Okay, so so these are and the other can be elaborative rehearsal. Okay, so this is basically a theory in memory. So elaborative rehearsal is that as you're trying to remember something, you try to attach meaning to it. Okay, so try to go under its concepts. Why you want to remember that theory, why you want to remember that concept, and what are the things that's attached to that basic theory or that understanding. And then you go deeper and deeper into it, and you try to attach meaning to it, what you're trying to remember. Then it's then it becomes easy, and it aids your memory to recall and to retain. Okay, so then so these are all things that you can use in your studies. Okay, and a very important thing is, I should say, like the word system, the word and the alphabet system, the acronym, and also the elaborative rehearsal. I've used that all through my life, and for everyday situation, the face and the repetition of name, that can be used. And there are quite a few things, but I think that's, like, as a student, you can use the 3 pointers that I've mentioned to you. It's really, really helpful. I've used that. And also, as a student, again, when you're studying something, it's also about rehearsal again and again, matlab revision again and again. Okay, to enhance your memory, it's always important to read through again and again. So that's why we say that since we were kids, like when we study, we talk about that you need to revise again and again. So I think revision is very, very important. The reason is that, again, it also impacts the memory, the brain mechanism. So you also have, like, all the neurons that is related to the memory part. So if you kind of like exercise again and again, if you so when you revise again and again, you are exercising your brain again and again. Okay, and then those neurons gets developed in that specific thing that you want to remember. So if you're planning to remember the Battle of Plassey, or what are the sociological factors of COVID. So like, there are many factors you want to remember. You have to remember that for your exam, so what you do is that you try to rehearse again and again. So it's a new thing that you have learned. So, like, new firing of the neurotransmitters would also take place in the brain. So there is this brain exercise going on. So then that's how what you're doing verbally or cognitively, uh, you know also impacts the very neurophysiological mechanism that exists. So these are the ways of how you can enhance your memory, and after that, obviously, then recollect and retain your memory, and these are actually very, very helpful.
Thank you, Senti, for giving such an elaborate answer and explaining all the terms and concepts with such great detail, for suggesting ways on how to cope with all kinds of anxiety, and for giving tips to sharpen one's memory. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and examples from your life experiences, which were quite relatable. I'm sure all the listeners will benefit from what you've just shared, and it is not only the students, but adults too will gain from it. And before we end this conversation, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, since I come from a field of clinical psychology, because in psychology there are also many specializations. So I come from the field of clinical psychology, and I have seen people at very close proximity about mental illness, about psychological disorders, and it is very important, to keep our mind and to keep our brain fit. So there's this very thin line between, like, going into a state of disarray. So from normalcy that we call, right, code, decode. So I think it's very, very important to keep our mind healthy. And healthy can be, as we have discussed a little bit about what I would suggest. So it's very important to give a food to the brain, and to keep our mind under control. Okay. And always to push ourselves every day, to motivate ourselves, basically, uh, regardless of whichever situations that we are, to motivate ourselves. And if and the other thing is that if you have any problem, please seek any professional help, and it really, really helps. It'll probably change your life 360-degree. So in relation to mental illness, there's a lot of stigma attached to it, but it is just a brain, it is just a brain. I'm not zeroing it down to just a neurochemical mechanisms. Yes, life experiences also determines the brain mechanism, but it's good to go and get professional help, and without any inhibitions. So mental illness, mental problems, or psychological distress are a reality, and go and talk. So there's no like, you should not have any inhibitions in regard to that. Yes, thank you.
Thank you once again, Senti,
Mm-hmm.
for giving us your precious time and sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. And
Mm-hmm.
it was a very, very fascinating conversation. And I wish I could kind of, go on listening to you. And I hope, you would join us some other day and then we can continue
Sure.
this conversation. And so, thank you once again.
Most welcome, and it was my pleasure talking to you. And thank you for inviting me to the podcast. Yeah, thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you, friends, for listening to us. If you wish to ask Sentisungla any questions, then do email me your queries at elogue2020@gmail.com. My next episode will be Diwali special, so do tune in next week for the sparkling surprises. And do not forget to like, subscribe, and share the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Anchor, and Google Podcast. If you have any suggestions or feedback, then send me an email or you can leave a comment on YouTube chat box. Thank you, Shabakar, and meet you next week.